The Thai capital, Bangkok, is seeing protests staged by two groups today, the anti-government camp and that of royalist supporters. The demonstrations are taking place on the anniversary of a 1973 uprising that brought down the military government at the time. Live now in Bangkok and Thailand, where thousands of protesters at the Democracy Monument are calling for a new constitution and the departure of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-ocha, where hundreds of royalists dressed in yellow stood nearby. Well, there are fears the country could see a return of the street violence that preceded the military coup back in 2014. And our correspondents, Saksit Sombat and May Wong, working very hard on the ground to bring you all the very latest developments. And let's just kick things off with you first, Saksit. We are hearing of clashes near the Democracy Monument. Local media also reporting that some protesters are armed. What's happening at your end?
Well, the protests have been predominantly peaceful. There have been some minor scuffles between rivaling groups, between the pro-democracy side and the royalist side, but they haven't really taken more than 1 or 2 minutes, as police officers and guards for the protesters have tried their best to keep those two sides apart from each other. And we cannot verify, we cannot confirm those local media reports of protesters being armed. You have to keep in mind that here in Thailand as well, media can be partisan on both sides of the political spectrum, so it could be possible that these have been fake news against one side or the other. But as you can see, we are not at Democracy Monument anymore. We're actually a stone's throw away from Government House, where protesters have marched on to Government House, and this is where we are at right now. Thousands of people are on the way.
Saksit, can you confirm then that protesters are planning to surround the Prime Minister's office and openly defy the King? Have you heard anything more about that?
That has been the plan all along, that they are going to march on Government House, that they are going to camp overnight in front of Government House. The question is how close they can get, because it has been closed off pretty far with barriers, and inside the Government House, Prime Minister himself is not in the building as well. And yeah, the defiance against the King. Well, they have already defied against the King in these 4 protests in just as many months that we have seen. They have been calling for demands of the monarchy. This is something that has been unheard of just not too long ago. An institution that is officially revered and officially, at least, being held sacrosanct. But all these demands for transparency, for accountability in its action and in its decisions, that has been normally whispered behind closed doors, but that is now out in the open since these protests have started. Now, there was supposed to be a royal motorcade, and there was supposed to be the plan that the protesters would be out there along the way to greet, quote-unquote, the royal motorcade on the way to the Grand Palace for a religious function. But they have thrown their plan out there, and so they have now marched onto Government House, where we are right now, earlier than scheduled. But those people are not the only ones on the street. My colleague, CNA Indochina correspondent May Wong, is nearby me, looking at the royalists. May, if you can hear me, what's the situation like on at the ground at yours?
Vastly different from your, Saksit. Where I'm at, where the pro-government supporters and the royalists are, well, it's largely extremely calm, as well as much less activity compared to where my colleague Saksit Sombat was much earlier. Now remember that this is the route coming from the palace and actually heading towards Democracy Monument. And as you can see right now behind me, well, the government supporters as well as the royalists have been lining this entire street here for hours, preparing for the royal entourage, obviously with the King expected to bypass this area using this particular street, because they said that they wanted to protect and also to make sure that the traveling from the palace all the way to the temple near the Democracy Monument, that is being safe for him to travel, and that no protesters will come in the way to perhaps spoil his travel plans. Now, I also want to show you that this is the Government House over here. This is where the red building, as you can see behind me, is the Government House. Where Saksit was earlier, it was just one part of the Government House, and this is yet another where the anti-government protesters were expected to be here. Now, over here is where the route is headed towards the Democracy Monument, and that is lined with all the government supporters there. And also earlier, when I was walking from that direction, from Democracy Monument, there were barricades, barbed wires, and officers that were stationed there to protect blocked this particular route to make sure that the protesters are not going to come in here and obviously not going to clash with the government supporters that are lining the street. I earlier spoke with the supporters of the royal monarchy and asked them what exactly do they hope to achieve, and they say that first of all they don't want to see any violence erupt from this particular meeting today, and also they want to make sure that the king is highly revered today and also that there will be no changes to the monarchy. Remember that the anti-government protesters are asking for changes to the entire system in Thailand. Namely, they want to have a reform of the monarchy. They want to see Mr. Prayut, the Prime Minister, as well as his government step down, and also they want to change the entire constitution, which they deem undemocratic. Obviously, this is a sore point with the protesters, or rather with the supporters here, because they feel that there is nothing to change about the monarchy. The monarchy is of the highest office in this country, and that needs to be kept intact. And that's the reason why today they have come out in full force to actually show their support for the king. Also remember that this protest is slightly different from the previous two protests that was held in August as well as in September last month. The difference this time is the king is in the country at this point in time, where the last two he was out of the country. So this time around is extremely significant, and also it seems that the two sides have come out in full force to showcase what their demands are, with the supporters and the royalists saying that they want to protect the monarchy and to continue to maintain the status quo, while on the other side, the anti-government supporters and the protesters are saying they are done with this system, they want change, and they want change right now.
Thanks very much for those updates, May Wong and Saksit Sombat, speaking to us from Thailand about the ongoing protests.